Hello everyone, welcome to another Classic Movie Monday. Before I begin, I just wanted to say thank you to Xerxes slash BASSFZz, I believe that's how you pronounce it. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Um, I am just using the terms that I have heard yourself being associated as, so I'm using those, being BASSFZz as the channel name, but he addresses himself within his videos, Xerxes. So, or Xerxes. So without further ado, before I go into it, feel free to check out his channel, which I will be providing a link below. He actually does discuss movies, sort of a similar topic that I discuss. And he also discusses some gender politics and all that jazz. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check it out. I'll be sure to put a link below. And for those of you who are actually new, who were introduced to me by him, because he answered some questions that I sent to him, which I am very thankful for. I do books, movies, and music discussions, in particular reviews of books and movies. And I discuss music in a more broad, general sense than something that is fairly specific. So I don't really talk about I don't really talk about music in a review format, although I'll maybe sometimes review things within the end of the year, like what I thought were the best songs that I've heard or the worst ones, things like that. But there's not really necessarily anything that I review from it. I just kind of talk about it. And I also address kind of random topics, anything that anybody wants to suggest me talking about, I'll talk about it. But yeah, that's really the heart of my channel. So yeah, and this is an open platform, and I am open to talking with anybody because I like making connections. And I think it's cool that you can make connections even on YouTube. So, without further ado, let me discuss this particular film that I wanted to discuss for this Classic Movie Monday. And as you see by the title, that is There Will Be Blood. Oh yes, this is a very interesting film in the sense that it is very dark and kind of gritty, a lot of grimness to it as well. And I think it's one of those classic movies that kind of goes in the sort of underrated category. Like, I don't think this is what people would consider a traditional classic movie. They wouldn't think, oh yeah, this There Will Be Blood. But what I do find what I do like to do with my Classic Movie Mondays is sometimes I like to pick things that are maybe a little bit more unique or not necessarily maybe as consideredly mainstream as a classic, or just talk about black and white films. And again, I have talked about black and white films. If you look at sort of my channel history, I've gone into a lot of those. But I do like discussing more current films that I think kind of deserve or sort of worthy of this title. And I think There Will Be Blood is a very interesting film, so I think that's why I feel that it deserves to be put in this kind of classic category. And I think it does a lot of things that are rather unique than I think a lot of other films have done over the years. Yeah, I'm going to kind of go into my explanation and my thoughts in regards to this film. Now, basically, in case anybody has not seen this film, Daniel Plainview, excuse me, who was played by Daniel Day-Lewis. I think it's funny that they didn't bother changing his name. I mean, Daniel Day-Lewis looks such like a Daniel, you almost can't give him another name. But I mean, he does look a lot like Abraham Lincoln when he plays Abraham Lincoln, so I guess that name could be put under his belt too. But he is a prospector within this film who wants to end up drilling for oil and ends up making a significant amount of money from it. And in doing so, he kind of sort of loses his, I think part of it is his sanity, and then part of it's like his morality. So there's like these two these two things where ultimately, as more successful he becomes, as more of a cynic and a and really a not as likable character again he becomes. And the interesting thing I find about Daniel Plainview's characters is he's kind of an anti-hero, in the sense that you kind of understand where he's coming from maybe at certain points, but the way he treats other people um, is kind of done in a very mean-spirited and very destructive and very kind of cruel sort of way, especially to his son named HW, who kind of goes along with Daniel Plainview's ride, so to speak, in as he goes up within the oil drilling business. And he kind of ends up being sort of, the thing is too is Daniel kind of doesn't really treat his son like his son. He kind of treats him as like this, he's my business partner, he's my means to sort of an end to kind of get what I want. So he's kind of like the person like in the shadows, but again, not somebody that is kind of it. Again, he treats his son, I feel, a lot more like a kind of, so to speak, because he really doesn't take his son's thoughts or opinions into account. He's just kind of there, and you sort of feel that kind of attitude, especially when you see the scenes of them playing out together, and he's trying to go and talk with all of these other characters that end up showing up and sort of playing a role within the plot. And so that's, I think, something also that's very important to note. And I think it only gets worse again as Daniel sort of rises to that level of power and control over the oil drilling business. And not only is he very kind of cynical, he kind of he kind of treats everybody else as almost like nothing. Like there's this one scene where and Daniel Day-Lewis does such a great job of nailing this character. He's just talking, and he just kind of talks about how he doesn't see any really value in other people, and he thinks that he doesn't even consider even people his competition. He says sort of in a way, I'm my own competition. I am the only kind of person that I consider, worthy of competition or of some kind of merit. Again, he kind of has this very egocentric way of looking at himself. Like he doesn't really look at his flaws as a person. He just looks at everybody else and says, "Oh, you're all horrible people, and I don't see any value in you." And again, I think this is what ends up him sort of resulting, again, sort of, treating his son really bad, distancing himself even further from his son, which you will see. And there's another very powerful scene that really does convey this this kind of lack of this kind of lack of willingness to, I guess, really, kind of embrace some form of love for other people or for his son. And it is kind of has this heartbreaking sort of drama to him, but it's also very very powerful, because I think on the one hand, I think Daniel Plainview does feel sort of guilty, but at the same time he kind of doesn't know really how to change himself. And also he's very he's not really fond of religion. You will see this throughout the film. especially when he becomes more popular and there's more people who come to him, and they sort of kind of treat him with a sense of respect, and that he's sort of part of the church and the people and the community, and he kind of just looks down on them and thinks, um, he just doesn't think highly of that community, because he doesn't really believe in community. He doesn't believe in other people. He only really believes in himself. Um, and so again, it's kind of like this ego, like I'm separating myself from other people. Um, so I find this to be very interesting, and usually you don't see characters who do take this kind of very this very kind of dark approach to life. Usually within films, you see a hero and a villain. Well, here, Plainview is supposedly supposed to be our main character, but at the same time, he has all of these um, serious flaws within him that he is sort of labeled into this anti-hero category. And I think another important thing to note about this film is not only his sort of kind of his, kind of his distance that he puts towards religion. He also puts a distance and sort of a hostility towards one of the other characters, who, again, I think if you look at the film, does have, I think, sort of this very flawed sort of mentality too. Except it's kind of like in the other extreme. So you have, Daniel Plainview is very cynical of the world, and very very for himself. And then you have this other guy named Eli Sunday, and he's sort of supposed to be sort of a voice for the church. And again, you do see him kind of trying to get a rise out of Daniel, and you sort of see how their relationship sort of plays out, and it does feel a lot like this sort of inner disdain, because I think Eli knows that Daniel doesn't really believe in God, and he doesn't think that he's a good person, and he has this sort of righteousness about himself, and how he thinks he's the answer to helping people with their problems and converting people. So again, he has kind of an ego about him too. It's just a different kind of ego. And it's interesting to see these egos kind of go at one another. And again, usually you don't see films play it out in this way. Usually a lot of the time, it's usually a good person's ego versus a bad person's ego. You have the hero who's very self-righteous of himself, and then you have the villain who's also very full of himself. But here it's these two sort of bad and kind of ugly egos, except Daniel's is maybe a little bit more obvious than Eli's internal ego that is maybe not necessarily as good. It's just kind of blanketed as good, because he sort of uses religion as a way to again kind of humiliate people, which he does do to Daniel within the film, which you will see, and you will see how they sort of have this kind of this sort of clash, and it ultimately ends up playing a pivotal role at the end of the film, which you will see, which I will not give away. But again, like I said before, the acting is great on all fronts, which is, I think, an important part to note when it comes to this film. Daniel Day-Lewis, I think, does a fantastic job. I think it's actually probably one of his better performances that I've seen. And I just, again, I know this is definitely not a Sunshine happy, go lucky roses, you know, it's definitely not the traditional classic film. This is a very different and yet dark take, but I think it provides some very interesting insight into how much, how much we and it just kind of shows like how much we put our how much it just shows you how dark and ugly um, it is when you try to kind of distance yourself and look at the world in a very critical way, as opposed to trying to maybe help people or be a better person. And at the end of the day, I think what um, what should be noted is the kind of life that Daniel ends up undertaking, and just how dark and and uh, and lonely and kind of bleak it is. Just this, because he just has this very anger filled rage towards other people. Um, and again, a lot of it I think has to do with the fact that he wants to sort of maintain his power. Um, and again, I think that's what results in him sort of taking this very um, this very uh, kind of dark road, and then you see how it really impacts his son later on and their relationship. So again, I think it kind of displays itself as a warning to people, and then it also displays sort of kind of like a dark reality as to how some people actually do live their lives, and now they live their lives in this way of the kind of in this constant constant game, um, as opposed to actual kind of caring community, and trying to lift everybody up. It becomes more about yourself, and in doing so, again, I think this is where we get more cynicism from Daniel's character. So it is really interesting. It's a very it's not a typical film. So I would say that if you are more into the more traditional classics, this probably won't please you as much. But I think if you're open to the idea of, the anti-hero and focusing maybe on, the focusing on someone who's not a character we're supposed to really admire so much as we're supposed to take some kind of, I think, wisdom from, in the sense of, how he's ultimately not really a good person, and that we should, try to stray away from that kind of behavior. I think was really the director's intention. But I think at the same time, I think he did establish some kind of understanding of making Daniel seem a little bit sympathetic, in the sense that we do understand why he is a little bit more, a little bit more skeptical of things, and how he is largely trying to survive. And in doing so, he kind of he kind of uses his ego against other people, instead of sort of cooperating with other people. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this film. It has its complexities to it. It has a certain level of simplicity and straightforwardness that I think people can understand. But yeah, I think that's really all I can say. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I think this film does bring in a lot of insights, and that's why I definitely consider it to be a classic, even though I think it's kind of more on the underbelly and not necessarily a typical classic film. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. Thank you so much to everybody who is new, and thank you again, Xerxes, for answering all my questions. Yeah, I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.